from last time. You have I presume you did it on some kind of a computer. Why don't you send it to me on email? You have my email on previous handouts. This way I can mark it much easier, and you skip like trying to decipher my handwriting, which is not the easiest. So if you did it, send me an email so I can correct it. If you didn't, then I suggest you do it after this time. Last time it became apparent that we're not exactly on the same page. So what I want to do in this lecture and the next 3 lectures are several things. I want to discuss morphological analysis in detail. I want to go, this is going to be the basics today, but next time and the lecture after the next time I will go through basic questions of defining what reflection is, what derivation is, what people think about them, what paradigm is. Then I'll go through morphological phenomena that cross over between morphology and syntax. And you can't discuss any of these things without bringing in frequency of use and frequency effects. What if you use a word very often, what becomes of it, why do you use it often, and how the constructions are affected. So this is the agenda for this time and the next and the 3 lectures that follow. What I want to do today is to go through notions such as morpheme, what a morpheme is, how we define morpheme, how we define affix, and go through what is called segmental morphology, which I believe is more familiar to everyone, in the sense that we, when we hear morphology, at least when I do, it brings up some bells that we chunk the words into parts, and these parts mean something. And then non-segmental morphology that people don't talk so much about. And it relates to things such as vowel length, segmental length in general, tone, intonation, stress, things like that, that do affect the structure of words as well. And other things. So I want to just track back a little bit. In morphology used to be what people wrote about, the structure of words. Since the basics of a lot of what we use as grammatical notions are in the Western world, classical Greek and classical Latin, then morphology is a central part of both of these languages, and morphology has been part of what linguistics was until the 1800s and even a little bit later. Generative linguists, Chomsky in his school, a lot of his followers in the 60s and down to the early 70s did not care much about morphological structure, since they considered that syntax is what is basic, and our ability to speak is grounded in our ability to combine words into sentences, and even the morphological structure of words reflects some kind of whatever basic word order they conceived that there is. So there wasn't much written about morphology, and I can tell you that even as late as the 90s, when I went to study in the States, I went to conferences where people came with papers such as there is morphology, and they would be, and it was still considered to be something like new and something that had to be discussed and was worth the discussion. So morphology may come back into modern linguistic thinking pretty much due to typological comparison. there are two generative linguists that need to be mentioned because they did their best to reintroduce morphology in linguistics, not very successfully, but Morris Hallett wrote about word formation and the importance to analyze the structure of words in the 70s, in the article belonging to the theory of word formation. And then Mark Aronoff introduced the notion of blocking. And I'll be talking about this later. Blocking is said to, if you have a form such as in, I mean this was his example and this is a paradigm example of what blocking is. In English, the past tense of go is went. And went is said to block the derivation of a regular word, a regular form, go, okay, since went exists. Now, there can be a lot of arguments why this it cannot be the whole story, but this is what Aronoff introduced, and this is where he brought in the attention to phenomena in language that are not entirely dependent on syntax, and that they're morphological phenomena that are even odd per se and need discussion. So those are two contributions that need to be remembered. And then various approaches to morphological structure came up in the 80s. As I said, a lot of them depend on comparison among the comparative approaches to languages. When morphology is discussed in generative linguistics in the 80s, it is always either in connection to syntax, so the order of elements in compound words are related to the elements in a sentence, or the elements in a word are related to phonological structure. So the term is from Greek, form and logos, word. If you just look up morphology on any kind of search engine, you will hit a lot of science literature, and it is borrowed from science and from medicine. So a lot of literature on morphology is actually about human anatomy. In the sense that we use it as linguists, August Schlegel is supposed to have used it first, but this is like some, something that we believe, and it's really not that important who did it first, but in what connection and the approximate time. Now, a naive view of what morphology is, if we look at this series of words, we see that there is, like, if we take this series of adjectives, happy, fair, quick, nice, and slow, and we compare them with words to the right and to the left, we see that there are elements that are repeated. There is happy and happy here, so and happy here. So there is an element and it's meaningful. Another element that comes in front of happy and creates another word with the opposite meaning. So we have another element that carries a more abstract meaning, something negative. So it creates the opposite. And then there is another element that changes the word class category of happy. So one that derives antonyms and one that derives adverbs. So a naive definition that I hope to prove to you is really naive, and why, by the end of this lecture, is that in a morphological analysis, we desegment the structure of words into some meaningful elements. This is what we do. We tell apart which elements have a meaning that is more referential. It refers to a state or entity or something that we can identify with in the outside world. And other elements that have more abstract meaning, and they usually not occurring on their own. They do other things, such as changing the word class category, changing the tense aspect category, so they can be said to belong to grammar, whereas more meaningful referential elements can be said to belong to lexicon. So in some sense, morphological analysis can seem rather easy and almost trivial. So in a sentence such as John loves Mary, we have John and Mary as two proper names, and then love as a meaningful element, and the S that derives the third person singular in the present. Well, even in English, that does not have really much morphological structure. It becomes problematic if we go and look at compound verbs, verbs that do involve a particle of some kind. So here I had to go look for the lost diadem. Had to consists technically of two elements, but they are not compositional, so you can't take them apart. And the meaning of obligation is rendered only if we use them together. So is had to one morpheme, or are there two morphemes in here? And the same goes for look for. The meaning of seeking is again not look and for cannot be decomposed as two separate morphemes because that that sense is rendered only by the combination that they carry. So this is one introduction of what makes a item in arrangement.